Hey y'all. Hi. Today I am going to build a Valentine's Day palette of my own design, inspired by your answers to my question in the video that I posted last week about new makeup releases, roasting Valentine's Day releases. In that video, I asked what you would do if you were designing a Valentine's Day collection. How would you theme it? And the idea was to take something that actually does belong in the Valentine's Day world, like something that is traditional to that holiday, but that doesn't feel cliche and that doesn't feel overdone and it isn't the same old like pink, red, hearts themed thing. And a lot of you answered that you would theme a collection around flowers, but that you would have it be non-traditional. So kind of like Victorian, pastel, Valentine's Day, lacy, faded colors, flowers themed, or like the love language of flowers themed. And then more than one of you referenced the idea of rotten or faded flowers, like a rotting bouquet that's falling apart, or burned, blackened, grungy, singed flowers. And that really captured my imagination. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to make like a dying bouquet or like dead roses themed eyeshadow palette. So we're going to have the colors of flowers and maybe many of the colors that are often in Valentine's Day collections, but they're going to be the ashy, mixed, blackened, grungy versions of those colors. And those are the versions that I tend to love of those colors. And I'm also very inspired just by the overall idea of a palette that looks like this. If this is your first time to my channel, then welcome. I'm glad you're here. I'm Hannah. I love makeup. I love it when I can build my own palette or just collect some of my own makeup together and use it instead of buying something new when I feel inspired. That's what I'm going to be doing today. If you enjoy this, I hope you'll subscribe. I do film a number of videos in this overhead style. Let us go ahead now and get into the meat of this video. So I picked this magnetic palette because I want to have a little bit of room to play. It's not as though I'm trying to build a quad or something, but I also do want to keep it edited. I know that for this inspiration, I'm totally capable of just pulling like 3/4 of my single shadows and grouping them all together. I have a lot of single shadows that I think could fit into this theme because it's the kind of thing that I like. So I decided to give myself a constraint, this kind of medium to small size. When you're being creative, constraints are often one of the best things you can do, right? You have to be more specific to narrow down the vision to fit it into a constraint. And I'm excited to see what I end up coming up with. I'm going to have a point of view, even within the realm of dead roses or dying flowers. I think that the first step, though, is to gather together kind of like any and all single eyeshadows that I think might find their way into the palette. I'm hoping that it'll be actually a pretty big collection, and then when I'm looking at all of the potential members of the palette and I'm seeing them all, how they relate to each other, then maybe a theme will emerge from the theme. So this is a pretty recent ColourPop release. They sent this to me. ColourPop has been sending me a little bit of PR. They actually sent me all of the palettes. There were 3 little palettes in this collection. And of the 3, this one is the only one that really stood out to me. It stood out because it has, as you can see, a bunch of the kinds of colors that I really like. There's this really deep blackish color that's not quite a complete black. It's almost like a charcoal. There's this kind of grungy neutral bronze, which I absolutely love. As soon as I saw that shadow, I was like, yeah, I'm going to be playing with this palette. And then even this sparkly dark brown and this kind of like silvery shade, which I've kind of been looking for something that could evoke like white or pale gray flowers that are kind of starting to go off. There's this nice dove shade here, but nothing that's not matte yet. I've been testing this palette basically to decide whether or not I want to keep the eyeshadows, and I know for sure that I want to keep this one. And I think I'm probably going to keep the rest of these 2, at least these 4. The great thing about these little ColourPop palettes is that the shadows are all removable. So I'm actually going to go ahead right now and dismantle this palette, basically turn it into single eyeshadows and disperse the singles in my collection. And I'm going to select some of them for this project. So I'm not depotting these. They are magnetic and the pans are magnetic. I mean, the palette is magnetic and the pans are also magnetic. This is just how they came. So it's not labored depotting. I'm just removing them. There. It was a little bit delicate because the pans are really shallow. This pan on the right is an old ColourPop single. It's in the shade Martian. I purchased this as a single eyeshadow. And this is from the palette that I just dismantled. So you can see that the pans are, I think, just ever so slightly bigger, really ever so slightly bigger in the palette that I just dismantled, but the single shadow is much thicker. It feels like it might even be twice as thick, although it's definitely not twice as thick. It just feels like that. It's hard to say if there's like a measurable difference in the amount of eyeshadow that's in these pans, because again, these ones feel just a teeny tiny bit bigger, even though they're shallower. I like the old style better because they feel sturdier, but I don't feel like it's only a teeny tiny bit of eyeshadow here. I feel like it's going to take me a while to use up any one of these. I actually don't see a theme emerging right away because I love everything. And this is exactly what I was hoping that it would look like. I would be so happy if I had a palette that offered everything that we see here. But this is too many eyeshadows, especially if I'm going to stick to my guns. I mean, I think, depending on the shades, I might be able to fit 14 shadows in here, 10, 12, 14, maybe a few more, but I'm going to have to cull this group probably by more than half, right? I'm not going to be able to keep more than maybe a third of what's here. But my first instinct is to try to retain this entire color story, but just in a smaller group of shadows. And I think that the best strategy for that is going to be to separate these out into groups of like colors and then select like one representative from each group. It's interesting, these 4 shades from the Natasha Denona Lila palette, it's almost like they don't fit quite as elegantly into the theme, like into the group. Like none of them quite fits, right? So I've grouped kind of more pale neutral shades here, and none of them fits there. These are like the pinkier, the paler sort of pinky nudes, and none of them quite fits there. Like maybe this one could go, but it's just definitely, I guess it could kind of go. It's just not as pink. You know what I mean? It's just more neutral pretty much than any of those. And then over here, these are more like coral, sort of pale coral, although this guy could kind of go there. These ones more have like a reddish orange tinge to them, and none of these quite fit in there either. These are like more burgundy, and this is more purple, like ashes of violets kind of, and there just isn't any of that here. There's no purple group. So they kind of all go together, right, as like purplish wine mattes, but they're much less alike inside of this group than any of the other groups. Within the other groups, the shades are all more alike. And it kind of makes me think I should just take them out and build based on what I was like picking multiples of the entire time. I wonder if these could, maybe these could go there. And we could say that this is kind of like a reddish brown group. Or maybe we separate these into sort of the warm browns and the cool toned browns. And maybe this could join the ranks right here or even up here. It's a little bit more in common with some of these shades. I bet it's not going to make it through though. And then this one can be kicked out because it's sort of like the cheese stands alone. It's purple and there just isn't any other real purple here. And I actually feel like even though I was sort of intrigued by this one, I'm going to take it out too. Okay, this is feeling more approachable. It's going to be hard to choose among these, but let's start doing that and let's see where we get. Immediately, I want to include all of these, like literally this entire group. And weirdly, I kind of want to include all of the blacks. As I was picking this, I had this thought, like, wouldn't it be amazing to have a palette that literally has like 5 different shades and textures of a grungy, slightly ashy black? But I think I'm going to start with just 2. I think I want these 2 in the middle. I really like all 3 of these. The 2 on the left are from Lethal. There's the matte and that sort of shiny black from Lethal. And then the third one is this very, very sparkly old shadow from the Sephora collection. That's this. I think I want to try to include all 3 of them actually. If one has to go, maybe it would be the Sephora collection one, or maybe it would, I don't know. I want to include all 3. I think that what I'm seeing so far is that I want to truly get into like the colors of decay and only have a small representation of the original colors or just like the slightly faded versions of the colors of flowers. So lots of this, and just a little bit from this corner and sort of that corner. I definitely want to include Sydney Grace Defiance. When I was selecting shadows and I saw that one, I was like, oh yeah, you're in. I think that this kind of like muckiest of the 3 greens really belongs. It's a little hard to choose from this pile of browns, but the cool toned brown from Lethal is really calling to me in this context because it sort of has a purple tone. Yeah, I definitely want that in. Of these 4, none of them are really jumping out at me, but I feel like if I had to pick one, it might actually be this guy, a really soft version of a rose color that is it's really starting to lose its vibrance, you know? And then picking from these brighter groups. Oh, this one, when I was going through, really intrigued me. This is from the Lila palette, and I don't use it very often. I rarely include it in palettes. I haven't used it very much over the course of the time that I've had it. I could see it performing an interesting function in this palette, but on its own, it doesn't really ask to be included. I think maybe not yet for that guy. A lot of my lethal colors are calling to me for this, and I think it's because I'm really into the idea of this color story. It aligns with the kinds of colors that I really like, and I'm the one who curated that palette. So yeah, I feel like this guy, Lithium from Lethal, that makes more sense to me than this one. Sort of like a taupey rose, taupey pink. Even though I collected a number of these copper colors, I'm not sure about them. I don't know if I want them in. I'm going to wait on that. In fact, I'm going to take this group off the table and see how the entire frame looks without them. I'm okay with that for now, actually. But I do want to bring something in from this group up here. I think that this Dove Gray, again from Lethal, it's gotta be in. It's almost one of the first colors I thought of when I was imagining this palette. And then I think I need more from here, from this corner, and maybe even the green as well. I do want to include this one, at least for the time being. This is from that ColourPop palette. It's called Flicker, or it was called Flicker in the Glow Getter Pressed Powder palette. Should we bring in this green? I feel like that really brightens it up. It's an interesting move, and I'm not sure I'm ready to make it. But maybe something like this, which is sort of a more bronzy green or like greeny bronze. There are a number of shadows in here that one considers green, on some level, but they are like the greens of the rotted stems of roses after they've been sitting in the water too long, which is what I want, as opposed to this like green. So yeah, I'm going to stick with these guys as my greens. That's Sydney Grace Defiance, and these other two are both from Adept. And I don't think Adept is selling single shadows anymore. I think that they have moved to a model where they just sell palettes of singles that are pre-curated. We're definitely starting to push the limits of what I can fit. I think we're starting to push the limits of what I can fit into my palette, and I feel like what we need are some more, just a little bit more actual flower color, like maybe this or even this, which is like a raisin. Yeah, let's include that. It's kind of like a raisin brown, but it's definitely, so pretty. It's definitely a color that some flowers are, and it's also definitely a color that some flowers turn when they start getting rotten, when they start wilting. If I had more space, what else would I include? I think I could see myself bringing in Kava just because I find it very useful. I'm also really into this. This is an old ColourPop single called Tinker Time. Yeah, let's leave that in for now because that is a very like Victorian vintage faded flower color. I think I need to know how we're doing in terms of space before I can make any more decisions. Okay, I don't usually do this. I usually don't mind having like asymmetry in a palette, but because I want to include a lot of eyeshadows and because this is the only one, like a lot of times I have a number of bigger shadows, but this time this is the only one that's an awkward size and that's like messing up it's not totally symmetrical because I have some circles and squares, but I like the fact that these circles take up the same amount of space basically as the squares. Without this shadow, everything fits perfectly and there's room for 6 more. And I was a little bit on the fence about it because there are already a couple of shades that are kind of doing what it does. So I'm going to let it go, and I really have a lot of room to play now. I can basically include whatever I want, which is super exciting. Should we bring these guys back too and just see? But I think I want to take them back out because there's something about having them in the palette that sort of constrains me. It's harder to think about what I'm working with. I like having them free while I make these decisions. So maybe I can include kava. I'm doing that thing where because it's almost panned, I haven't been using it as much, and it would be so great to use up literally every last speck of it. So I'm going to put that in and try to accomplish that. Let's think about practical things. So I open this palette and I look at it, and what do I want to do? The first thing that I do usually is I go for one of these mid-toned, shiny, rich metallic shades, and I put that all over my lid. And then I usually want to deepen the outer corner with something. And right now I've got these like blacks and browns that I can use for that. But I wonder if maybe, no, I actually don't feel like I need any more outer corner deepening shades. So I'm going to take out the ones that are here, trying to get in to perform that function. Even this, actually. I could include, shades that I just kind of like, that I was sort of thinking about bringing in because something about them attracted me when I was going through my singles. I feel like maybe a little bit more of this ashes of roses or like ashes of violets situation could help us. Maybe even this as well. It's like we're creating a more rosy row down here. So we have like the really slimy, rotted parts of the flowers here on top. In the middle here, we have the really faded colors of the petals. And down here, it's like we have the parts that are the least rotted, the most reminiscent of the original bouquet. I feel like one of these two, that one, this clearly fits better in the row that we're making, but it's starting to be so... It looks less rotted than I was thinking it would. Like it doesn't have as much of that darkness as I thought that it would. Now, I feel like the balance is off. So I'm making this, I'm taking making the bottom row, which I was saying is going to be like the lightest, brightest part. I'm taking some from what was above to build that so that we can put in more darkness up here. Yeah. I mean, I understand why I wanted to keep the green out. It was making the whole thing less colorful. But if we don't include any of these like corals, then it's almost like there is room for a tiny bit more color. And having that color be this green, I feel like it suits my vision better. Because, when flowers start to die, it's like the greenery becomes a stronger presence, basically. In fact, maybe we should include this too. I feel like this would be useful, but it doesn't really fit the theme. This one might be similarly useful, but does fit the theme. Yeah, let's put that in. That's one of those ColourPop shades that I just took out of that little palette. Okay, I really like this. I'm going to put it in, and maybe I'll rearrange a little bit as I go. Well, first I'm going to put these other eyeshadows back. Okay, there. I think that will work for me. I spent a lot of time rearranging them. I wanted to get each shadow as close to as many other shadows like it as possible. Or another way of saying it, I wanted all of the shadows, for each shadow, I wanted all of its neighbors to be as like it as possible. So sort of like a gradient going in any direction. I mean, I wasn't able to do that perfectly, but that was my guiding principle. I moved away from the 3 rows representing like the 3 stages of decay, and I just put together the shadows I had selected in the way that I think is going to be the most useful and the most pleasing for me. And I love it. I love it. I know I say this every time, but this is my favorite single shadow palette that I've ever built. Y'all are really onto something with the Dead Flowers palette inspiration. I do think that this strong green definitely changes things. The palette would be different without that. And I'm actually not totally sure that I like what it does. It is the strong, I feel like that green is the strongest presence. It's the thing that is the most incongruous, and it's having the most dramatic effect on the overall palette. But the thing about it is that I want to use it. I'm excited, like I see it and I'm excited to sometimes open this palette and end up using this green. So I'm going to leave it in, but let it be known that I think if I were, for example, if I were making this palette to put it on the market, I would probably exclude this green. Well, actually, maybe more people would buy it if it had that green, because without it, it does run the risk of feeling a little bit boring and like a little bit too neutral. Depending on the formulas and depending on the lens through which you're assessing it, I actually think it does need that bright. If it didn't have this green, it would need to have like a brighter coral or something. But for me right now, the green is it's the presence that I want to make it just a little bit more dynamic. Let's swatch it. So I didn't swatch it in a way that lines it up exactly, right? I did a sort of snaky swatching. So I went like this, windy, 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 windy. But then I lined them up in rows. So the swatches kind of tell a different, I mean, it's the same color story, but they tell a different color story because different shadows are next to each other when they meet each other again, coming back the other way. That makes sense in my brain. I hope it makes sense to some of you. Basically, it's a way of seeing it through slightly different eyes, right? Because whenever you look at a palette, the way that the colors that are next to each other relate to each other influences the way that you see it and the potential that you see in it. So even with pre-made palettes that aren't free of their packaging, it can be a good exercise to swatch the shades in a different order. Here's what I have to say. There's one thing that I don't like about this, and that is that the metallic black looks so blue when it's swatched out. And I don't think that this shade is super blue all the time when it's being used. I mean, I don't know, maybe on my skin, if I used this all over the lids, it would read as kind of like a blue charcoal. It's such a pretty shadow, and I'm going to leave it in the palette because in addition to saying that you would create like a wilting flowers or like a dying bouquet Valentine's Day makeup collection, several of you mentioned a goth inspired or like a really edgy, dark, gothy Valentine's Day inspiration. And I feel like this cool toned black, kind of this like grungy sort of seal black gray as part of a monochromatic color scheme. I feel like that helps the palette be a tool for that kind of thing. So if we're trying to make like a goth flowers inspired makeup look or like a dead roses makeup look that was gothy, I would definitely use this version of black for that. And I think that it would help me get there in terms of the aesthetic inspiration. I personally don't like having this pop of blue in a palette that's otherwise kind of warm except for the green. You know what I mean? I just feel like it's like warm, bronzy, grungy, cracked, drying rose petals situation with the green, which kind of fits because the green turns into greeny bronze. And then in that color family where everything's singing together, this bluish black is like really standing out. And to me, it looks like it doesn't belong. I think that if this palette were going to market, there would be pros and cons to having that. And maybe I would ultimately end up leaving it because I would think about those of you who want to create kind of like a gothy color scheme. But when I was swatching it out, it was the one thing that stood out to me as not quite fitting with my usual desire for like a color story this size. And so I just wanted to mention that because it's of interest and it's just the kind of thing that I like to discover and to talk about. However, overall, I feel like this is another rip-roaring success. I cannot wait to use this palette. I'm really excited about it. I hope that you enjoyed watching this too. Let me know what you think, especially if you're one of the people who thought of this. If you were like thinking about what it would look like to have a Dead Flowers Valentine's Day makeup collection. Oh, which reminds me, if it was a collection, I would want it to have a lipstick. Okay, let's say that we're releasing this palette and we're going to release like 2 lipsticks, 2 or 3. Let's see. Well, I'm going to swatch these out. These are the candidates. Let's see how many of them I wouldn't be able to resist including in the collection. Okay, so these are the colors that like immediately sprung to mind. This one is Lorna Doone, the Gucci lipstick. The second one is this ZC lipstick. It's M15, that matte one. The third one is a Royal Scandal, which is also Gucci. Then we have Maybelline Gone Greige, Revlon Rum Raisin, and Revlon Mink down here. And I feel like of these, I feel like it's kind of got to be Gone Greige. I feel like Maybelline Gone Greige has got to be released with this collection. That's this one. And then I thought it would be kind of a cool idea to also release like a bright red, an interesting bright red. So I brought these Kira Weiss lipsticks over. Oh yeah, maybe this one. This one is Confidence, and this one is this one's Euphoria, right? Yeah, this one is Euphoria, and this one's Confidence. So they're really similar, but Euphoria is just a little less fluorescent. Confidence has this like super fluorescent quality to it. And I think I feel like either one of them would be an amazing dynamic addition to this collection. But I feel like Confidence, the fluorescent one, is a little bit more of a unique take, like a little bit more unexpected. This is very beautiful, like a really beautiful, bright, rusty shade. But I feel like there's something about this. It's like we're really going the distance when we're adding something unexpected to this. Gosh, but next to them, I feel like Revlon Rum Raisin is looking so good and so correct as part of this collection now that I have the other red. And it almost justifies having the super fluorescent one because there's like a super grungy shade for people who want that, a super crazy bright shade that's going to really make a full face of this collection look dynamic and more editorial. And then there's something that is more of like a very wearable red, slightly rusty My Lips, but better lipstick color for the in-between. So maybe we have 3 lipsticks that go with this. Okay, that is it. My Valentine's Day collection. What should we call it at the end of the day? Wilted and jilted. I feel like at the very least, this lipstick shade would be called Jilted in the collection. And maybe the Gone Grays shade would be called Wilted. But I don't know, what would the collection be called in the palette? Dead Roses is a good idea. Dead Bouquet. Faded Love. A lot of you guys were recommending things like Faded Love or something even about like rotted stems. I don't know. I'm sure that there's like either a really good pun or just a really good, inspiring, exciting name for this collection. And I can't quite get it together to name the entire thing right now. But I do think that it's very beautiful. I think that conceptually it's strong, right? Like we've done it. We've come up with something conceptually very strong that I feel like is also strong in its execution and I think could potentially do well. Like, don't you think that this would sell well if it was produced really, really beautifully, if the concept was sold really well and the formulas were really good? Personally, I feel like it would. But I don't need that to happen for me to be able to use this. I think a lot of you probably don't need that to happen for you to be able to use these colors. You don't even need to have single eyeshadows that are popped out or depotted in order to use this color story. You can use palettes that you have and just kind of hunt and peck among them and find the shades that you would be using in this palette on any given day and put them together to make the eye look that you would make. So I hope that this was fun and inspiring for you like it was for me. And I hope that you can take that inspiration and apply it to the tools that you already have. And if you do that, I would love it. I would love to know how it goes for you and whether or not you end up thinking that this is like a good collection, a good Valentine's Day collection. Thank you so much for watching this video. And don't forget to take extra good care of yourself so that you can be the most effective version of yourself as you do your work in the world.